It's squeaky bum time. Andy Burnham's going to have to announce his team pretty soon. In particular, there's that all-important choice at number 11. For Thomas Tuchel, that's easy. It's a number traditionally worn by an out-and-out left winger. For Andy, it's a tougher decision. Marcus Rashford might please the fans, but would the markets buy Chancellor Ed Miliband? Keir Starmer's still Prime Minister for another 2 weeks. His last big game, appropriately for an Arsenal fan, is a defence summit. We still don't know who's in Burnham's squad, but he's determined to play 2 number 10s, 1 in each half of the country. Brave. On the show today, for the government, we'll be joined by Health Secretary James Murray and Reform's Treasury spokesperson Robert Jenrick. We'll try to get a better idea of what an Andy Burnham premiership will look like with Labour's Deputy Leader, Lucy Powell. And I'll be joined live by the Chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Dr. Mary Ann Stevenson. Plus, with us throughout the show, Associate Editor of the Sunday Times, Josh Glancy, former Deputy Cabinet Secretary, Helen McNamara, and business journalist and broadcaster, Ian King. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. 250 years ago this weekend, England's 13 American colonies declared the following: prudence will dictate that governments should not be changed for light or transient reasons. The colonists were right. Kicking out a country's administration should be a big deal and should signal a major change in the nation's direction. In the Americans' case, they were throwing off what they saw as the tyranny of an English king. In 12 days' time, the Labour Party will dump one leader, elect another, and present the country with its 7th Prime Minister in a decade. But listening both to the incumbent and to the man who will take his place, it's difficult to understand why. According to Sir Keir Starmer, and these are his own words, he saved the Labour Party, rebuilt public services, restored economic stability, created more security for young renters, increased workers' pay, and granted employees new rights, all down, as he put it, to his vision. Well, when he's delivered this New Jerusalem, why would you drop the pilot? On the other hand, his likely successor, Andy Burnham, promises the biggest change in our lifetimes in the way the country is run. Bear in mind, he's facing no competition for the job, so he can say pretty much what he likes. But he tells us that he'll stick to Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules, that he won't raise income taxes, won't raise national insurance, won't raise VAT, he won't restore the 2-child benefit cap, won't drop the triple lock on pensions, and he won't meddle with Starmer's defence investment plan. He'll stick to the 2024 manifesto, and there will not be an early general election. To be honest, so far, it all sounds less Manchester and more Paris to my ear. You know what they say over there? Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Well, let's start this morning with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Health Secretary, James Murray. James Murray, it's reported this morning that you took away the responsibility for overseeing trials on puberty blockers with children from your junior minister, Preet Kaur Gill. Why?
That's completely untrue. The decision-making on this matter is with the Secretary of State, with myself, as it has been before with my predecessor, and there's been no change to ministerial responsibilities at all.
Well, where'd that story come from?
You'd have to ask the Telegraph about that story, but I'm very clear that the decision-making has always been with the Secretary of State, and there's been no changes to ministerial responsibilities.
Well, it must make you feel rather cross, because the story makes it look as though, because you have a different view to her on these trials, she seems to think that they're not a great thing. I guess you think that you have to follow the recommendations of Cash Review and all of that, that you're using your position to essentially take her out of the picture.
Well, look, I think that this is a difficult issue, and it's one that I was very clear that I wrestled with. I struggled with it. You know, I felt myself uneasy and a bit uncomfortable with taking a decision on this matter. And I've obviously talked to my ministerial team about it because, you know, I want to be collaborative as a Secretary of State. I want to listen to views of my ministerial colleagues about it. But in terms of the ministerial responsibilities, there's been no change in that space. It's always been the responsibility of the Lords Minister to oversee this policy area. And the decision-making is with me as Secretary of State, as it was with my predecessor.
So trials go ahead?
Yes, and I said it out in the Commons that, you know, I feel uncomfortable and uneasy about it. But I think having looked at the clinical advice and the need for clinical evidence and having very robustly interrogated what safeguards are in place, on balance, it's right to let it go ahead.
All right. This week, a rapist called Shabir Ahmed was freed to walk the streets. When is the government going to legislate to remove the obstacles to his deportation?
Well, I want this man out of the country. I think we all do. I know that the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary were working on this, looking at all options to get him out of the country, because it just feels wrong. And I think it feels offensive to our sense of justice for him to be able to be in the country. I mean, I know that he's been stripped of citizenship, which is important, and obviously we've deported 10,000 foreign national criminals, but for him to be in this country feels wrong. And it's absolutely right that the Home Secretary is doing everything she can to change this.
It's reasonable for everybody in government to say, this is shocking, the man should be deported and all the rest of it. But he isn't being deported, and he's not the first one. Under the previous government, there were similar cases. Is the problem here that the Pakistanis don't want him back and you can't force them to take him back?
Well, look, I know that this is a job for the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary to work out the exact way of getting him deported. I'm not going to step on their toes by suggesting exactly how they should do that. But I don't think they would object to me saying that, as a government, we should leave, you know, no stone unturned.
Would that include
how to do this?
Would that include putting pressure on the Pakistanis by essentially withdrawing we don't give them that much aid, but we give them some aid money, or, for example, blocking the £3 billion worth of remittances sent by Pakistanis here back home?
I'm not going to speculate on exactly what mechanisms the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary might use. That is their responsibility to think through the best way of getting the outcome we all want, which is this man to be out of our country. What I can say, though, is how much I want him to be out of the country, how much I think we all want him to be out of the country. And I know that my colleagues, Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary, will be looking at everything they could possibly do to make that happen.
All right, let's go on to territory that you are familiar. The likely next Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, says that he's going to abide by the 2024 manifesto. He's going to stick to Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules. But to quote him, he says, there is room within that manifesto for movement on tax. Now, you were Chief Secretary to the Treasury. What is the room?
Well, what I understand from what Andy said the other day, that he was talking about, for instance, business rates and the importance of supporting high streets, making sure that online giants pay their fair share. There's work that the government has begun on that already, about making sure the business rates for high street shops can be reduced. But I think for that to be a priority for Andy, it's fantastic news, because high streets need support. We need to make sure that our high streets are not only centres of jobs and economic success, but also places we can all go out and enjoy as hearts of our local community.
Well, that's interesting. If that's such a good idea, why don't you do it before? You've always had the opportunity to do it. Well, there's a reason why you didn't do it, isn't there?
That's what I said. There's been some work which has been done already to reduce the rates of business rates that apply to high street premises. But for Andy to want to go further, it's fantastic. And I think, look, this is a broader point, if I can just say this, it's a broader point around the transition that we're going through as a Labour Party and as a government right now, in that I think across the Labour Party we have huge gratitude for what Keir did in terms of winning the last election, laying foundations in the first 2 years. But now is the time to pass the baton, and we are all rallying around Andy with his optimistic, hopeful vision of what to do in the rest of this Parliament. and we want to make sure we continue to do the right thing as a Labour government for people across the country.
If I may say so, everybody's very enthusiastic about Andy's vision to spend a lot more money, for example, reducing business rates and so on. 6 weeks ago, you would have been in here saying, we can't do this, we can't afford this, we inherited 22 billion black hole from the Tories, we've got debts and so on.
Hang on a second, but Andy's been clear that he wants to stick to the fiscal rules. He's been clear that he signs up to the manifesto that we were elected on in 2024. You know, it's absolutely right and the right thing for the country that he offers a vision of what to do next. But he's said...
my point is called rules, but sticking to the fiscal rules means you cannot be spending a lot more money. And he's now saying, I'm going to spend more money on defence. I might spend more money on reducing taxes. Some people think he's sort of hinted that there'll be more money for international development. I am pretty sure that 6 weeks ago, if we'd had this programme of spending in front of us, you would have been saying to me, well, we'd love to do this, but we can't do it.
No, but look, you mentioned, for instance, defence there, and you know, whoever is Prime Minister, whoever is in government, we need to make sure we're putting money into defence. The Prime Minister set out the Defence Investment Plan. Andy Burnham has said that he wants to make sure we fund that. But can I just make this one point, Trevor? Because you're focusing on tax and about public finances, which is important, and it's important to emphasise the fact that Andy has said he wants to stick to the fiscal rules. But at the heart of what Andy's talking about is devolution. It's about making sure that power goes down to local areas.
I want to come to that, but let's just deal with this issue that you've raised. You've raised about defence. Your administration is leaving Burnham's Chancellor with a black hole to fill in defence budget. Uncosted or unallocated spending, I should say, of between 10 and 14 billion. How are you planning to pay for all the drones and state-of-the-art weaponry that both Starmer and Burnham now think is necessary?
Well, look, it's the first job of our government, of any government, to keep the nation safe. And we all have a responsibility to make sure that we are safe and that we are ready to face the threats of the future. The Prime Minister set out the Defence Investment Plan, which increases the already very large amount of investment going in to defence, 270 billion even before the Defence Investment Plan over this Parliament, the highest sustained level since the Cold War, increased further by the Defence Investment Plan. Andy has said he stands behind that and will make sure it's funded. This is a responsibility of the Labour government.
But people, I don't need to tell you, because you've done the sums. That still leaves 5 billion to find. He's basically given, or the current administration's basically given Burnham a hospital pass, hasn't it?
Well, Andy said that he wants to make sure that the defence is fully funded. And, you know, the way that the public finances work is that the Chancellor at the last budget made sure there was a big headroom, a big buffer within the public finances. If decisions are taken between one budget and the next, they can then be addressed at the following budget.
She's claiming that she's got the 22 billion budget. It's going to buffer, and it's going to come out of that. I mean, look, the basic point, I think, is this. You didn't actually manage to enact even the mildest of welfare reforms, 5 billion quid thereabouts. You need money for defence. And Andy's talked about this, money for skills. There's going to need to be money for social care. There's money for decarbonisation. If you stick to the fiscal rules, you don't cut welfare, you won't abandon the two-child cap, or the lifting of the two-child cap, and you're going to keep the triple lock, you are going to have to put up taxes, aren't you?
Well, look, when I was a Treasury Minister, my answer to you would have been that any decisions about taxes are for the Chancellor to take on Budget Day. That remains the position, because it's always for the Chancellor to take on Budget Day.
This is just arithmetic.
No, but it is an important point, which is that, you know, rather than picking off individual policies and saying, what are you going to do about that, what are you going to do about this, the way that government works is that you have buffer, you have a headroom in the public finances. Decisions can be taken between one budget and the next, and then at the following budget, the public finances get set out comprehensively.
Skills, social care, all these things you're promising, someone's going to have to pay for them. I mean,
let me give you...
And someone's going to have to explain it. That perhaps in the end, you can't make the decision, but somebody's going to have to make it. You're going to need a good Chancellor who can back up the Prime Minister, tell a good story. How are you feeling about Ed Miliband?
Well, look, Ed Miliband's a great colleague of mine.
Could be a great chancellor?
That is for Andy to decide. You're not going to tempt me to start playing your fantasy cabinet games on this, Trevor.
It's not fantasy cabinet.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I'm seeking your advice. You've worked with him.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many ways you ask the question, how much you smile when you ask it to tempt me to engage in this. There's plenty of speculation. Look, I can see the speculation in my peripheral vision. I'm focused on the NHS. I'm focused on my job as Health Secretary, making sure we're delivering for people there.
All right, I want to come to the health sector and the issue you want to raise today. But before, you mentioned devolution. Andy Burnham's talked about a number 10 of the North. What difference is that going to make, except just adding another government-funded lobby group to take money away from London?
No, look, it's a hugely symbolic move to show that under Andy Burnham, the government will have a top priority of being focused on every part of the country and making sure that all parts of the country receive that focus and that support that they need to succeed.
So seriously, the first thing that Andy Burnham does is symbolics.
Well, no, it's a symbol of his wider approach. And he's spoken. You said taking powers away from London. If you mean
that's exactly what he said.
If you mean London as a city, London where I'm an MP for. Andy's spoken about the importance of extra powers in London. Can I just give you one example here, Trevor? Because I was a deputy mayor for housing in London, and I saw some of the benefits there of having greater powers at a local level. So we had to negotiate with the government for money for affordable housing. When I was deputy mayor for housing, I decided that we should use that money for a council home building programme. That is the kind of flexibility that local leaders can take when there's more powers and money involved.
But the point is, this is all performative. I'd love to talk to you more about that, but I want to ask you one last question, which is really about the man who's still Prime Minister. He told us this weekend how proud he was of his records. Saved the Labour Party, public services rebuilt, stability restored. You will give me the list and all the rest of it. If it's all so great, why are you getting rid of him?
I think it's right to pay tribute to Keir for what he did. He changed our party. He meant that we could win the last general election with a huge landslide. He's laid the foundations of what we're doing now.
That's my point. You're giving me the list of the great things. So why are you dumping him?
It's worth me saying, what he's done in international relations has been really important for our country too. But the Labour Party is a team, and now is the time for him, and Keir acknowledges this, to pass the baton to the next leader, who will be Andy Burnham. And Andy Burnham is the right man, the right person to lead our party and our country for the years ahead. And politics is a team sport. The Labour Party is a team. Keir's made a huge contribution, which has got us into government. It's now time, and the whole Labour Party is rallying around Andy to carry that forward.
But a particularly brutal one in this case.
Well, look, it's nothing new to say that politics can be quite brutal. But I think if you look at what's happening with this transition, the transition is smooth. The Labour Party is rallying around Andy, and we all are going to back him to succeed.
James Murray, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the Associate Editor of the Sunday Times, Josh Glancy, former Deputy Cabinet Secretary and co-host of the In the Room podcast, Helen McNamara, and business journalist and broadcaster Ian King. Ian, what have we learnt this week about what the economic approach of a Burnham administration might look like?
Not sure we've learned a great deal, Trevor, have we, to be honest? I mean, he's pitched himself to his party and his fellow MPs as being to the left of Sir Keir Starmer, but we don't really have much meat on the bones in terms of how his policies are going to differ significantly. There's, as Sir James Murray was telling you there's been some murmurings around changes to business rates. There's speculation in some of the newspapers today that he's going to widen the mansion tax. There's obviously been speculation that he may tweak capital gains tax. All of these are really fairly peripheral sums of money, though, in terms of the overall context of the government's budget. And particularly when he's boxed himself in, or appears to have boxed himself in the way the current government has by not raising VAT, income tax, national insurance. I mean, those are the big levers if you're the Chancellor, that you need to pull to raise significant sums of money. And unless he's going to be bold and repudiate that, and given that he wasn't even elected on the last Labour manifesto, he's got an opportunity to do that if he wants to raise spending in the way that we think he wants to.
Helen, is he a bit stuck now with that?
Burnham?
Yeah.
In some senses, and I'm sure he'll feel that, and I'm sure that in the process of getting closer and closer to Downing Street, he's seeing much more of the downside and the constraints that he's got than some of the excitement. It's a daunting task that he's got. But I think he backs himself, does Andy Burnham, and he backs himself not just on the decisions he'll make for his team, but potentially finding economic growth. It's all well and good, and he's absolutely right, as you heard from James Murray about the constraints we've got on our spending. Lots of those constraints go if we have a confident economy and some actual serious plans for growth, and that's got to be part of the magic in the next few years for all of our sakes.
I want to come back and ask you about a point that made by Morgan McSweeney about preparation for government in a second. But James, what did you make of it? Josh, I beg your pardon. What am I saying?
Well, I just think it's interesting that Helen talks about economic growth, and obviously that's something that the country sorely needs, and we need to sort of grow the pie and inject a sense of optimism. But it seems to always come with a caveat. So he wants growth, but he wants it to be good growth, and he wants it to be in every postcode. Well, and then he talked about London's economy being overheated, and then we've had reports from his team this week about being worried about driverless taxis just up the road in King's Cross because, what will happen to the Uber drivers. The point is, if you always caveat your plans for growth with all these other things that you want to come with the growth, you're not likely to get that much growth. So I've not been massively impressed with his vision for economic growth at the moment, and it doesn't seem to be at the heart of what he's saying. We've had almost 20 years of stagnation in this country economically, so we're not really in a position to start being picky about what types of growth we want. We just need to get growing, and so I've been a bit underwhelmed on that front.
Helen, I noted this week that Sir Keir Starmer's chief of staff, a former chief of staff, I beg your pardon, Morgan McSweeney, said that the thing that surprised him was how unprepared for government they were when he sat down and looked at it. Well, Starmer's team had 4 years. Burnham's team's got like 4 weeks. They're not ready, are they?
I think they'll be putting their best foot forward for sure. But I thought from what Morgan said was really interesting, and you heard it in what James said earlier too, lots of the credit that's given to Keir Starmer about the work that he did is about all of the work he did before he became Prime Minister. So they've all talked a lot about the massive transformation that the Labour Party went through. And sort of unfortunately, that does feel like that was where the focus was in on the party and in on itself. And they didn't put enough effort and enough thought, enough consideration, and enough thought in a kind of very widespread debate amongst themselves about what the point of a Labour government was, bringing themselves together around an agenda that then they could translate into government.
Does that not shock you, though?
Well, yeah.
Quite shocked. I mean, I know we sort of knew that was the case because we've seen it happen, that they didn't really have enough plans. But, I mean, is that not pretty unusual?
Well, it's pretty unusual if you think about governments preparing for power. So if you look at what the Conservatives did, for example, in the run-up to 2010, they had a couple of years and an extremely serious and in-depth programme of work that involved quite a lot of people. So it is unusual, but I do think that I wonder if they really knew what governing was about. It surprised me at the time that they never went back to, from a civil servant's perspective, you had, in the 3 terms of the Labour government in the early part of the century, extremely professional, competent people who were very good at governing. And it was surprising to me that not enough of those people were asked for their opinion. Now, we're seeing the opposite of that with Andy Burnham and James Purnell. James Purnell was a minister at that time. They look like they are drawing much back.
Who's going to be Andy Burnham's chief of staff?
Yeah, it looks like they're drawing much further back into their history. And I hope that they have learned some of the lessons for the last 2 years, that governing is not as easy as it looks. It is about choosing, and it is about making sure not just have you got the right people in the right jobs, but are you up for making some of these really hard choices?
The big word of the week, Ian, has been Manchesterism. I'm going to see if Lucy Powell, the deputy leader of the party, Manchester MP, can help us understand that a bit more. But the thing that Burnham's definitely talked about is this idea of devolution. I'm mildly sceptical about this because I think you can always see this in one of 2 ways. You can either say, we're going to reach out and we're going to put more power outside of South West 1, outside of Westminster, Or you could read that as, we're going to put our blokes into Manchester to make sure that Manchester is doing what we want. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if you look at Scotland and Wales, that has not been a great advertisement for devolution, has it? You know, whether it's educational outcomes in Scotland, health outcomes in Wales, it's not an attractive picture. And you look at some of the other things that have gone on in Wales over the last few years, the transport down there is still diabolical. The line down to South Wales, the main rail line, has not been fully electrified. If you drive to West Wales, well, the M4 stops just outside Newport, and you're then on A roads all the way down to the coast. Devolution hasn't really delivered for the folk that live in that part of the country, so I think everyone's right to be sceptical. In terms of Manchester, I mean, yeah, there was a devolution of power, which happened, of course, under George Osborne. This isn't a recent development. And let's not forget the two architects of Manchester's success were Howard Bernstein and Richard Leese, who were there long before Andy Burnham. It was they who...
Bernstein was the chief executive, Richard Leese was the leader of the city council, yeah. And Osborne basically imposed the Greater Manchester mayor on them.
Indeed he did, yeah. And it has been a great success. And Burnham's achievement in Manchester was really not to tamper with that arrangement and to try and build on it. Obviously, the big marquee policy that he likes to talk about was taking the buses back into public ownership, public control. But really, you know, there's a lot, as Helen was saying, there's a lot more to governing than just running an efficient transport network, which, by the way, has been funded by colossal increases in investment, which all came from Westminster. And if you're the mayor, it's easy to dish that money out once. Your job is simply to say to Westminster, here's how much I need, please give it to me. Under the Osborne settlement, that was achievable.
And Josh, you've been writing about how the whole Manchesterism thing is going down elsewhere in the country.
Yeah, well, I was down in Redruth in Cornwall this week, where, you know, it's almost 350 miles from Manchester. And to a lot of people there, they're very keen on devolution. You'll struggle to find anyone in Cornwall who doesn't want more power in Cornwall and less power in London. But the whole Northern Soul, number 10 of the North thing, I mean, frankly, a lot of people weren't that engaged with the process yet, because it is quite surreal what's happened. You know, even for us who are in the thick of all this, it's all happened very quickly. If you're not really paying full attention, getting on with your life, a lot of people didn't really know that Andy Burnham was going to be the Prime Minister in 2 weeks or whatever it is. But you know, he's really going to have to speak in different ways to different parts of the country on this. It can't just be a Northern Soul thing. And so in Cornwall, for example, they really, really don't want a mayor. You know, they've fought tooth and nail not to have a mayor because they find that, frankly, an affront. So that's one problem. I think the other problem, the question I have, and it comes back to what Ian was saying about Wales, is how good are local governments at spending the money? You know, people will tell you, well, we know what we need. You know, we have that sort of close connection with what's necessary. But do you get really high caliber officials? Is there enough accountability? Is there good local media in the area? And that can be a real, you know, so as we've seen in Wales, you know, there has been a problem with actually getting really high quality government in place.
Don't take this as a sort of sour, bitter expression, Helen, of somebody who was an elected local government official in London. I was chair of the Assembly in City Hall. But there is a sense in Whitehall, as what Josh has been saying, that you can't quite trust the locals, and that actually you need to make sure that they're kept on a tight leash. So this whole idea of devolution runs counter, I think, to the culture of Whitehall, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a totally fair point. I recognise that culture, but that's to do with power. Like, who, when you have a lot of power, thinks it'd be really great to give it away? I think that's one of the other things that is going to be interesting to see how the Burnham Premiership plays out, because the other thing that Scotland and Wales and Manchester and London, to be fair, shows you, people aren't grateful for your great generous gift of devolution. They turn around and they say, thanks very much, can I have more money? All of the credit is mine and all of the blame is still yours, Westminster. So it's not a smooth path.
Okay. All right, well, let's turn now to Reform UK. A little earlier, I spoke to the party's Treasury spokesperson, Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick, you said pretty clearly that you want to get Shabir Ahmed out of the country. But there were similar cases under the Conservatives where the blockage wasn't the 1971 Act, which is what people are talking about now. The problem was that the Pakistanis wouldn't take the men back. Why is it going to be any different now?
Well, the lesson from that period is that you've got to use all the levers of the British state to get these despicable people out of the country. And I'm afraid to say successive governments, Conservative and Labour, have just been too weak. We are not a weak country. We do have ways of doing this. We're giving around 80 million quid every year in aid to Pakistan. The Home Office issues thousands, tens of thousands of visas to Pakistanis. We should be pausing the aid, pausing the visas, putting maximum pressure on the Pakistani government to take this man back. Well, there was a case a year or so ago where the Pakistanis refused to take a single grooming gang perpetrator back to Pakistan unless we opened up the UK to flights from a discredited Pakistan airway. You know, that is completely unacceptable. We're pretending like the UK is some kind of, you know, we could just be pushed around. Well, we shouldn't be pushed around any longer.
But you're asking this government to do something which your government failed to do with at least two other individuals. So during a period, by the way, when we were giving Pakistan way more aid than we're giving to them now. Why did the Conservative government fail? And you expect
because there was a complete lack of will. There was a complete lack of will. It doesn't actually generally emanate from the Home Office. The issue is, will the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister of the day be willing to actually row in behind this? And I'm afraid to say, in the last Conservative government, they just were not prepared to do that. They would make up ludicrous excuses like, oh, we can't put pressure on Ethiopia because it will damage diplomatic relations with Ethiopia. Well, the British public don't care. They just want to get these people out of our country. So what if it harms relations with small countries around the world? Get grooming gang perpetrators out of the UK. It can be done. It just requires the strength of character to do it. And I can assure you, be in no doubt that if Nigel Farage was Prime Minister and Zia Yusuf was the Home Secretary, these things would be done.
Well, let's talk about those two individuals. And let's clear up one thing, which is with Mr. Yusuf. Last time you and I spoke, you said that under a reform government, no one would be deported purely because they were living in social housing. After the programme, your colleague Zia Yusuf said that wasn't right, that wasn't party policy. And he tweeted that if a foreign national lives in social housing at taxpayer expense, they automatically fail our economic test and will be deported. Now, this is his territory, so he's basically put you right, has he?
Well, we're basically on the same page. What we're saying is two important...
No, you were at a different end of the book.
Not true, not true.
He said you were wrong.
Not true. We're saying two important things here. Firstly, social housing, which is a precious commodity, which we've got too little as a country, should be for British citizens. And that is what reform would do. Secondly, if you're in the UK and you're not a Brit and you're living in social housing, you will not be able to remain in it because you will not meet the economic test. So you're going to be given 3 months and to find private accommodation. And if you can't, then I'm afraid you will have to leave the country. And it's just a matter of basic fairness. The overarching philosophy behind a reform government is always put the British people first. And that comes for social housing. It will come for taxes and jobs. Today, we're saying that when the British government procures things, it should be putting British companies first, not international companies. So that's going to be behind everything that we do in government.
So no divisions in a top team?
No, none at all.
Or as some cruel people say, he's bullied you into a tougher position?
No, none at all. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Trevor, but Reform is a united team, and we're getting on with preparing for the next generation.
I have no feelings about this, and I am always happy to see friends united. You've now lost 4 parliamentary by-elections in a row. Your leader can't seem to explain how he's paid for the properties he owns, and he won't say exactly what he's done with the donation of £5 million he received, which is odd because, on the face of it, there's nothing actually unlawful about that donation.
Well, there's nothing... it's not just on the face of it. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It's a private gift from a friend to Nigel. Nigel has good friends who've supported him over the years.
It is being inquired into by the parliamentary authorities.
Well, sure. We're very confident it will be dismissed.
But the point I really want to get to is, whatever may or may not be true, is Nigel Farage now becoming more of a liability than an asset to reform?
Don't be silly, Trevor. Nigel is...
What do you mean, don't be silly?
Well, because it's a silly...
Don't be silly. You've lost half a dozen points.
It's a daft question.
You've lost half a dozen points. You can barely hear a word out of your leader. He's keeping a low profile.
Nigel Farage is keeping a low profile.
Nigel Farage is a low profile.
Nigel Farage is out and about across the country. In fact, he was in America the last couple of days meeting the US Vice President.
Well,
he's travelling. He's done more public...
To remind you, he's a British MP. He can do as much as he likes in America.
He's also somebody who is the leading character who's likely to be the next Prime Minister of this country. It is quite right that he travels around the world and meets other statesmen. But my point is this. Nigel is one of the most hard-working people in British politics. He's been out touring the whole country. And look, we're leading in the opinion polls. We've led in the last 350 opinion polls. Nigel is on course to be the next Prime Minister of this country, and we are now preparing for that. We're selecting our candidates. We're raising the money that we need. We're professionalising the party. We're writing our manifesto. We are going to be ready to take on Andy Burnham whenever he's got the guts to go and get the mandate that he needs to get.
You still have to deal with, if you like, the lingering questions about, if you like, the character of the party and the leader. And there's another story today. What exactly, can you tell us, is the role of Mr. George Cottrell, who is a man convicted of money laundering in the United States, who appears regularly with Mr. Farage, and who the Sunday Times today says pays for his security. Now, a spokesperson for Reform has called the story baseless and contrived. Is it true that this convicted criminal has been paying for Mr. Farage's security or not?
This is a very old story that has been...
Well, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not.
It's an old story that's been dredged up by the Sunday Times, which, let's remember, is a Labour-supporting newspaper.
I don't think they think that, but... but you're not even answering my question.
They backed the Labour Party at the last general election.
Is it true or is it not true?
He's an old friend of Nigel's, and he supported him in the past before Nigel was even a Member of Parliament. He has no formal role within Reform whatsoever.
Is he paying for Mr. Nigel Farage's security or not?
I believe it says in the story that he isn't, but he supported Nigel before he became a Member of Parliament. So there's nothing to see here. What I find astonishing about that article, Trevor, is that we have Andy Burnham about to become our Prime Minister. The media is doing absolutely nothing to scrutinise this man. What does he intend to do? And you've got a newspaper, you know, a Labour newspaper like the Sunday Times, putting this story on the front page, trying to drag Nigel down.
OK, you want to talk...
Nigel is not going anywhere. Nigel is going to keep working hard to ensure that we get the change that this country actually needs. People watching this programme this morning are desperate for change. Their bills are going through the roof. Their wages are going nowhere. They're sick of the small boats arriving all the time. They think the country is going down the toilet, and we need to make sure that we've got a government with real change and a strong leader at the helm. That is Nigel, and that's Reform.
3 minutes ago, you told me that Nigel Farage is going to be the next Prime Minister.
Yes.
So people watching this programme want to know who their next Prime Minister is going to be. What is this person really? Who are his friends? Who is he influenced by? So let's just deal with him and not the person that you're saying is not going to be next.
Let me just say it, Joe. It's an important point.
Let me ask you
I'm just saying that the media seem to be fixated on Nigel.
I don't care about the media.
Constantly trying to knock him. It's not working because the public can see through it.
Well, hang about a bit. Hang about. When you say the media's fixated with Nigel Farage, well, why not? You've just told me he's going to be the next Prime Minister. And by the way, when people come in here, I talk to them about their party, not about some other party. So let's just deal with Mr. Nigel Farage. You are telling me that this Mr. George Cottrell is just some acquaintance. He doesn't, you tell me, pay for Mr. Farage's bodyguards and so on and so forth. Do you think...
So what's the story then?
You're telling me that.
You've conceded that...
I haven't conceded anything.
George Cottrell is an old friend of Nigel's. He's allowed to have friends. And that he supported him before he became a Member of Parliament. doesn't do so now, what's the story? There is no story here. This is just
I'll
yet
tell you what the
another
story.
in a whole
Okay, I'll
chain of
tell you what the story
smears
is.
that's
To
trying
the
to drag
ordinary
Nigel down. And we're
to
sick
the
of it.
ordinary
Let's talk about the
person.
things that people actually care about.
Well, let me tell you what they care about. Because I actually do spend a lot of time
so do I.
Like
I can assure
like
you, Trevor.
being lectured by people on the buses and the tubes. And one of the things they will care about is seeing Britain's next Prime Minister in the company, day after day, of a man who has been convicted of money laundering. It's not a good look, is it?
He's an old friend of Nigel's.
No,
he has no
I don't
role.
care if he's an old friend. He's been convicted of money laundering.
He has no role within reform. There's no story here, Trevor.
What the next Prime Minister... Oh, really? You don't mind what our next Prime Minister... who our next Prime Minister hangs out with? You don't care about that?
Trevor, this is
People out there do.
Trevor.
If it was Andy Burnham, you would be...
Well, no one's
scrutinising
scrutinising anything to do with Andy Burnham at the moment. The man's just... drifting into number 10 with no scrutiny. We've seen where that's gone in the past. It happened with Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. Total disaster.
At least acknowledge
No,
that for
Trevor,
the average person,
you're wrong.
There is a question to be asked.
You're wrong. With respectfully, Trevor, you're wrong. The country is in dire straits. People want change. They want journalists like you and Westminster to stop muckraking about Nigel Farage and to talk about the things that really matter.
I don't want
their
to go
bills,
on
their jobs,
I don't want to go
immigration,
on about this.
public services, defence.
Personally do
Where is our country actually going? And I can assure you, the only person who has got the courage to turn this country around and deliver real change is Nigel. And that is why we're leading in the opinion polls.
I personally don't want to go on about this, but I am astonished that what you're saying is that the person that you think is going to be our next Prime Minister, it really doesn't matter who he's seen with, what that person's background is.
I care about
and
his principles.
I bet you if
I care about his principles and his values, and I can tell you this, there is nobody in British politics who has been more consistent on the most important issues facing this country than Nigel Farage. He has been campaigning on these issues like the effects of mass migration on working people, like net zero and how it's deindustrialising our country, since I was a teenager. Since I was a teenager. Let that sink in. For 25 years, this man has been fighting for working people in this country.
Yes,
And nothing that you say about a family friend of his or this or that the Sunday Times wants to put on its front page is going to change that. If we want to get this country back on its feet again, we need to have a reform government and we need to have Nigel as our Prime Minister.
Robert Jenrick, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, back to our panel. Josh, Helen and Ian. Josh, have you got in touch and asked them to pull the front page?
Well, I was somewhat surprised to hear the Sunday Times described as a Labour newspaper. That's not generally how it's perceived. But, I thought that was a very sort of quite a belligerent response from Robert Jenrick. But it is interesting because the central question here for me is that these benefits were given to Nigel Farage by this young man, George Cottrell, but they weren't declared. And it adds to the sense of shiftiness, a slight sense of secrecy, because we also have this £5 million gift that was given by Christopher Harborne that also wasn't declared. Now, these are business people with particular business interests, particularly around cryptocurrency, something that Farage is also very keen to promote at times. And I think it's perfectly valid to ask questions about that. And I think you're quite right to point out to Robert Jenrick that they present Nigel Farage as, quote-unquote, the next Prime Minister. Fine, maybe, let's see. But that comes with scrutiny. He gets a lot of positive coverage, a lot of interested coverage from the press, but he also is going to get scrutiny, and they're not answering the central questions here.
To be fair, they say this is baseless and all the rest of it. But what is the actual allegation here? That it smells a bit?
Well, no, that he was provided with security and other benefits in kind from George Cottrell in the year before he went into Parliament as an MP, and you are, according to our understanding of the rules, you are supposed to declare benefits such as that to Parliament, and that's why the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner is investigating him over the Christopher Harborne £5 million donation, because the concern is that people will go into politics and we want to know where their interests are, where their money's coming from, and in the year before you go into Parliament, that's particularly important because we don't want our senior politicians to be under undue influence or secret influence. Transparency is obviously very beneficial to our democracy.
Well, we're in a rather good position. I think, if I remember rightly, Helen, you at one point were responsible for the Cabinet Office unit, Propriety and Ethics, I think it's called, that looks after all of this. You know, you might have written the rules, I don't know. What do you reckon?
Not the part was. So I find this slightly odd in lots of ways. So reform, whether people like it or not, have been quite a sophisticated operation up until now. The way that they're handling these allegations is really odd. And I think just shouting at people, as you saw Robert Jenrick do with you just now, about people don't care about this, I think they do. I think people care about the perception of how their politicians operate. And the kind of worst case scenario here is that, or the best case, is that he should have declared a load of benefits that he was getting, to Josh's point. It does matter that we know who our politicians are in the pay to. And sort of by running away from the question and then shouting at people who are asking it, doesn't look like a party that's preparing for power or office or treating themselves terribly seriously. It's remarkably thin-skinned, I think, for a politician who presents himself, Nigel Farage presents himself as a man of the people, robust, can answer any questions, can do anything. And it feels a lot like they're running away from what's happening now, which is not smart.
What do you think, Ian?
Well, anecdotally, talking to friends and colleagues who covered the Makerfield by-election, apparently the £5 million donation from Christopher Harborne came up an awful lot in doorstep conversations. And given that Reform have very deliberately positioned themselves as the outsiders, you know, they're not Labour, they're not Conservative, although they now have a number of former Conservative names in their top team. But if you're trying to position yourself as the outsider, and you're then seen to be taking big donations from people like Christopher Harborne, it does just, to the man on the street, the woman on the street, it does come across as, well, you're just the same as the rest of them. And anecdotally, that was coming up an awful lot in Makerfield. I can understand why Nigel Farage has concerns over his security. I mean, we've seen countless incidents where he does seem to attract more flack, more sort of physical flack in campaigns and when he's out on the stump than other party leaders. And I don't know, maybe the solution there is, you know, there's arguments over state funding of political parties. Do you have more state funding for politicians to keep them safe? Crikey, we've had 2 MPs murdered over the last decade. So clearly safety is an issue for a lot of politicians. And I imagine that motivates a lot of what Nigel Farage does in terms of taking some of these donations. Well,
both of the individuals that we've talked about, Harborne and this chap that's in the Sunday Times today, in the crypto world, which is an unusual bit of the business world. What are you hearing from business about reform, Ian? Are they being taken seriously? Are people preparing for them? What's the deal?
Yeah, they certainly are. There was a big push probably about 9 months ago where particularly Richard Tyson and Nigel Farage were doing the rounds of the city and the top tables in business. So there has been a lot of interest in meeting these guys. Anecdotally, Richard Tice comes out very well from a lot of this. A lot of people quite like Richard Tice. Obviously, he comes from a business background. You know, he was in the property industry for many, many years. And he understands what goes into making a business successful, which, let's face it, an awful lot of politicians don't have that. So anecdotally, one hears that Richard Tice goes down particularly well.
OK, we'll have a look a little later at the reform performance, because I think some of it is quite revealing, but we'll take a break. But before we do that, I want to say, regarding the story we've been discussing about Nigel Farage, his spokesman said it comes as no surprise that the Sunday Times has chosen to publish this baseless and contrived story covering a period of time when Nigel Farage was not even an active politician, let alone an elected one, given that the newspaper backed the Labour Party at the last general election. Contrary to the story's tone, no parliamentary rules have been broken. Well, up next, I'll be speaking to the deputy leader of the party, Labour Party, Lucy Powell.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy? It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat. It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island.
The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre.
The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin.
Jerry, any comment on the judge's decision? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end, of a 52-day trial.
Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris.
Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting.
The whole neighbourhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
In a matter of days, the United Kingdom will have a new Prime Minister. There'll be no nationwide election and no new manifesto. Indeed, we don't really know a huge amount about what Andy Burnham would do in number 10. Much of the talk so far has been about Manchester. So let's speak now to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, who is also a Manchester MP, Lucy Powell. Good morning.
Good morning, Trevor.
Can we start with a little mystery, which I asked James Murray about, but I don't think he had much of an answer. Keir Starmer was telling us this weekend how proud he was of his record, public services rebuilt, economic stability, children no longer going to school hungry and all that, all because of his vision, it's his word. What are you thinking of? We're in earthly paradise and you're getting rid of him.
Well, I'm not getting rid of him. Obviously, he's
you, the
made
party,
his decision to resign. And look, it's 2 years this weekend, isn't it, since that historic and seismic general election
victory, and we have a huge amount that we can be proud of in the time since that election, lifting children out of poverty, as you say, bringing rail back into public ownership, giving people the right to sick pay on day one, increasing wages, stabilising the economy, getting waiting lists down in the NHS, a huge amount we can be proud of in that time. And the Prime Minister's taken the decision to resign. And I think would rather, at this stage, we don't need to kind of dwell on that. That's a decision that's been made. Now we're looking forward to the next period of the Labour government, how we can take all of that much further so that people really are feeling it in their everyday lives. And I think that so that we can tell a much stronger story about how all those things knit together, that we are on the side of ordinary people and that we are working night and day to improve their lives and give them hope and opportunity. And I think that's the thing that people have felt has been a bit missing.
You say we don't need to dwell on it, but if I may say so, I think we do for a bit, because it's a bit baffling. You've just told me how great the things he's done in just 2 years are. For the ordinary person who's not paying that much attention to politics, the question then arises, why is he going? And by the way, if he had decided not to resign, would you have backed that decision in that case?
Well, look, I think, as I've said before, I think it got to the point where, we're in the middle of the World Cup, aren't we, right now, where as the leader, as the manager of the team, the Prime Minister had lost the dressing room, and that's then he has to decide how he wants to take that forward. Well,
it'd be a bit of a mystery if he took off Harry Kane in the middle of a match, wouldn't it? I mean, what's the point? Why is he going?
Look, we have made some mistakes. And those mistakes have overshadowed at times some of the really good things that we've done. We are, in a difficult situation sort of politically, and people want a really clear vision and a compelling purpose and an understanding of what a Labour government is really all about. And as I say, it's a decision that the Prime Minister has reached. He's explained some of that thinking himself, and now we need to look forward as a party, coming together, really putting the best case forward that we can, and showing people that a political party, a mainstream progressive political party like the Labour Party, really can actually change people's lives for the better, because at the moment people are just disillusioned with politics altogether, and that's why they're turning increasingly to the extremes of politics for those who are promising the earth and delivering not very much. So it really is a huge responsibility on us to turn this around.
All right, well, let's look forward and let's turn to the incoming Labour leadership. One thing we know is that you will continue to be Deputy Leader, come what may, because you're elected by the members, not appointed by the Prime Minister. So let's talk about... Oh, by the way, has Andy Burnham told you if you're getting a job in the Cabinet yet?
Absolutely not. Conversations that I've not had, and I don't really want to have. They are decisions that he can take should he be elected. Look, nominations haven't even opened yet. That's later this week in Parliament. Should he become the Prime Minister, they're decisions that he should take. They're his to make, and they're appointments that I think he will do at that time, and I think he's been clear about that.
All right. I'm rather glad that you're on, because I know you don't know this, but from days, my brother lived in Moss Lane East for many, many years. So I spent a lot of time in Manchester, and there's not far from where you grew up in Disbury. And even in Moss Lane, they say people in Disbury can be...
I was born just round the corner from where you're talking about.
Brilliant, because we think, we Mancunians, that the people from that area are plain speakers. Can you tell me in plain English what Manchesterism is?
Well, we have a phrase which you may remember from your time coming up here. Was that the Hacienda days, Trevor, or you're not admitting to that?
I'm not saying anything about Tony Wilson. I'm not going there.
Well, one of Tony Wilson's most famous phrases is, "This is Manchester. We do things differently here." And what we have seen, a realisation of that really, in Manchester doing things differently, taking powers, working together strategically, collaboratively across business, the voluntary sector, universities and others, with a long-term vision about how we're going to rebirth Manchester, renaissance of Manchester, bring in jobs and investment, but crucially, that all parts of Greater Manchester benefit from that, and that people who live here are able to contribute and be part of that renaissance. And that began kind of 40 years ago, really, in Tony Wilson's era, when we first started making investments in the airport, which at that point was just a strip in the ground. And over time, that's why we've seen now Manchester, the fastest growing region in the UK. This is a place that people come to and don't want to leave, and they enjoy living here. We've got, you know, it's a great city. And we're all very proud. Mancunians, we're incredibly proud people, as you know, Trevor.
Can you give me an example of a policy that doesn't have the word buses in it, that describes and explains that in a way that the rest of the country can feel, oh yeah, we can see how that would apply to our part of the country?
Yeah, I mean, we've brought a huge amount of investment into Manchester over the last 20 years, really, 10, 20 years. Big headquarters have come here from, other, huge companies have chosen to base themselves here. We've had long-term investment. I'm really losing my earpiece here. We've had long-term investment that has created new jobs and homes.
But you're not going to put skyscrapers into Great Yarmouth or Hastings, are you? What does this mean for the rest of the country?
It's about... Well, it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's not one size fits all. We have a particular economy here that began in computing and digital, for example. We've got a real knowledge economy here, and advanced manufacturing as part of that too. Other places have got an economy that maybe is built around nuclear power or shipbuilding or renewable energy or an economy built around a university or different things. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's the whole point about putting place first and giving places the power to set out their own long-term vision of their area and bring in the investment that's needed to deliver that.
Forgive me, I'm only interrupting you because I know there's a particular thing you want to talk about, and I want to ask you one more question on this issue of devolution before we get to that. The marquee announcement from Andy Burnham is the establishment of Number 10 North. He says this is about devolution of power. But I think that if I'd been interviewing Andy Burnham about 3 months ago and somebody had said, we're going to put a bit of the Prime Minister's office in Manchester, he would have said, I'm a bit suspicious about this. This is Downing Street extending its tentacles to my territory. Why would Mayor Burnham be wrong and Prime Minister Burnham be right about putting Number 10 North in Manchester?
Well, I don't think he would have said that, actually. And I think it's to sort of misunderstand, really, what he's been talking about. And, this is something I've come to really learn and appreciate about what he's been saying in the last couple of weeks, which is that this is not a branch office of Number 10. What he's talking about here is taking large chunks of government departments in Whitehall that are responsible, or seemingly responsible for devolution, bringing them together in one place outside of London in order that they can absolutely facilitate and supercharge the devolution of powers to all other places. So this isn't about Manchester, this is about the North East, it's about Cornwall, it's about London, it's about all parts of the UK being able to have the powers over the areas that they want to, because I've experienced it too. I've experienced Whitehall keeping hold of powers and resources that really we could use better here ourselves in order to achieve that mission that we've set out over a long time. So this is about taking power from Whitehall to distribute it around the country, and this will be a very powerful reorganisation of government in order to deliver that lifeblood back into every community and every postcode across the country.
Lucy Powell, thank you so much. I expect we'll be unpacking much of that on this programme in the future when you are a Cabinet Minister.
Let's see. Thank you, Trevor.
Next, I'll speak to the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Dr. Mary-Ann Stevenson.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood has rallied around her. It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
The Equality Act came into force in 2010, bringing together legislation on race relations, disability rights, sex discrimination and more. Now, the Conservatives say they'd scrap parts of it and reform would get rid of the Act altogether. As Nigel Farage says, it's made the UK anti-white. Well, with me now is Dr. Mary-Ann Stevenson, Chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which enforces and interprets and explains the legislation. Now, both Reform and the Conservatives want to revisit the Equality Act in one way or another. Reform want to abolish it, complete Tories to amend it. Realistic, is it time for a review?
I mean, I think the Equality Act is really important because it protects all of us. And I think one of the problems you have about the Act is that there is this myth that, you know, certain people are protected because they have protected characteristics and other people aren't. But we all have protected characteristics. You know, there have been white men who have won cases for sex and race discrimination. And if you think back to a time before we had equality legislation, you know, when my mother was a young woman, she approached a local council to apply for a job and was told it's not our policy to employ married women because we want to keep the jobs for the men. Now, that was perfectly legal then. It's not legal now, and that was because of, you know, the Sex Discrimination Act more recently. Similarly, discrimination against people on grounds of race, discrimination against people on grounds of age or sexuality or religion and belief. I mean, only this week I was at an event about digital ageism, and it was looking at older people and their access to public services, where, for example, GP services move everything online. You know, we have been able to raise that problem with GPs and point out that they've got obligations under the Equality Act to make sure that their services are accessible to everyone. So you can't end up in a situation where if you haven't got a smartphone, you can't make an appointment with your GP. So it's a lot of our everyday life is really protected by the Equality Act.
But the Act is now 15, 16 years old. And for those who are watching who don't know, I once sat in the seat that you sat in. And some people would say that the Act that we constructed isn't quite fit for 2026 and 2030s. And there are things that need to be addressed. And that's one reason why, I mean, the Reform want to abolish it for what their own reasons. And the Conservatives are saying amend it because they think some things aren't working.
Yeah, I mean,
is there a case for that?
I mean, I think it's always really important to keep legislation under review. You know, our equality legislation has been reviewed and updated since the days of the Sex Discrimination Act and the Race Relations Act. The Equality Act brought in new protected characteristics, for example, sexuality. So there is always a value in reviewing things. But I think, you know, the specific concerns that have been raised, for example, around the public sector equality duty, I think that duty fulfills an important role.
This is a duty that says public bodies have to pay attention to
equality,
what they do to make sure that it doesn't introduce discrimination in some inadvertent, unwitting way.
So, you know, while the Equality Act protects us all from discrimination, most people don't have the resources or the time or the energy to be taking cases. You know, in an ideal world, we prevent the discrimination before it happens. And that's what the public sector equality duty does. So it says to public bodies, you've got to think about how you can avoid discrimination and promote equality. And that's really important.
Mr. Nigel Farage, and I was going to say I don't want to take this personally, but I do. He says that the legislation is anti-white, and he specifically said that was my doing. Is there... he's not the only person who believes that. Is there some case for saying that we may have made some mistakes?
I think we need to recognise that there are, you know, a large group of people who don't feel that they're protected by our equality and human rights legislation. And it's important to kind of properly listen and engage with those concerns rather than just kind of dismiss them as ill-informed or malign or whatever. Part of that is to do with the way in which cases are reported. So you see politicians, for example, saying, you know, if you're a white man, the Equality Act doesn't protect you. It does. And as I said, white men have won cases for sex and race discrimination. The reason I think our Equality Act works as well as it does is because it protects all of us. It's not a tool that's just used by certain groups against others. It is a shield for all of us. I think there are sometimes occasions when, you know, public bodies or private bodies misunderstand their responsibilities under the Act, make decisions that aren't actually lawful. And the point there is to make sure that, you know, we as the HRC and others can provide the guidance that actually helps people understand what they're supposed to be doing.
There's some people on the left who make a different criticism. They say that the legislation and the Equality and Human Rights Commission don't pay enough attention to the role of class. And maybe that should be made a protected characteristic like race or sex. So, when the 2010 Act first came in, it included what was called socioeconomic disadvantage, which would be class, within the sort of public sector equality duty framework as something that public bodies needed to have due regard to. That wasn't enacted by the coalition. It is something that the government is planning to enact, and it is something that I would welcome, because I do think class inequalities
are often ignored. And if you look at people's economic situation, on my previous job at the Women's Budget Group, it was very clear that class was one of the single biggest determinants of people's situation in life.
Oh, so you think that there could be a sort of amendment, development, evolution of the legislation?
Well, so the government has said that it is going to enact the socio-economic duty, which would mean that public bodies had to have due regard to socioeconomic inequality alongside other inequalities. It wouldn't be a kind of individual protected characteristic where people could take cases. It would be more when you were developing policy. And I think that makes sense. I think that's really important. If you're thinking about how you develop policy, you want to make sure that it works for everyone. And that includes making sure that it works for working class people as well as middle class people.
One of the reasons that I've always thought that some of this view or this feeling that the legislation and the whole machinery is a bit anti-white and so on has less to do with the legislation and more to do with social change. There's a rather serious issue emerging in education, and that is a widening disparity between some ethnic minorities who are very successful, Chinese, South Asian, West Africans and so on, and white children. The first lot overachieve, the second lot underachieve consistently. Is that something that the Commission is paying attention to?
I think, again, this is something that is very specifically tied to class, right? So it's white working class children and in some situations boys in particular who are underachieving in schools. And I think that is why, that's a sort of reason why the socioeconomic duty would be important, so that you can actually recognise the kind of class element of this. This isn't just about race, it's that combination of race and class that's really important. And it's that, I mean, the technical term, the jargon people use is intersectionality, but it's the way in which different inequalities interrelate. But I do think it is something that's important to look at, because for people to have faith in our equality and human rights framework and actually in our broader politics, they need to feel that there's something in it for them, that the particular inequalities and challenges that they face are recognised and being addressed.
Well, you know what? I'm really glad you've got the job now. I haven't. It's really difficult. Mary-Anne Stevenson, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Next, we'll hear once again from our panel. We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? The UK?
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down. As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict.
The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
Back to our panel, Josh Glancy, Helen McNamara and Ian King. Let's start this final segment by talking about what we think the Starmer legacy is going to be. Josh?
Well, it was interesting in a recent interview he said that his proudest policy was reversing the two-child benefit cap. And that was something that he was withdrawing the whip from MPs for supporting early on in his premiership. And I think that sums up quite a lot of the problem, which is that the thing he's proudest of was something he didn't initially support but got pushed into by his backbench MPs. I think weakness as a Prime Minister was an enduring theme. The legacy I think he'll want us most to reflect on is security and international affairs. I think it's a mixed bag there. He has done some... I think the work he's done on restoring relations with the EU and picking up the slack with Trump and Ukraine and Zelensky has been important. I think he does deserve some credit for that. Certainly if you ask Zelensky, he'd give him credit for that. But then you do also look at the defence investment plan and the complete cluster shambles that that's been. And
you had me worried there for a second.
Yeah, and, you know, it's not funded. That's going to be a headache for Burnham, and that's going to be part of Starmer's legacy too. So the right intentions on a lot of stuff, but he hasn't been able to move Whitehall, hasn't been able to command the centre and exercise his power properly. And he's also just been radically unpopular, you know, fairly or not. So it's not a great legacy, I would say, but it may look better depending on how Burnham does over time.
Helen?
It's not an optimistic note to end on, Josh. Well, I think he is saying, and everybody I know in the Labour movement thinks that the work that he did to rebuild the Labour Party before the rest of us saw him as Prime Minister is the thing that he's really proud of. It's harder to put the finger on the thing in the last 2 years, which feels even like Starmerism. He has done a great deal on the world stage. He's talked a lot about change, but he hasn't actually been able to translate that into things that have really made a difference. It's felt very much the same, and that's partly why he's on his way out. So that's both an opportunity and a massive risk for what comes next, I think.
What do you think, Ian?
Well, I look at it through a business and an economy prism, effectively, and you'd have to say it's been a failure on that basis. Unemployment has risen under Keir Starmer's time in number 10. GDP growth has been pretty mediocre. There hasn't been a sort of step change from what we saw under Rishi Sunak. In fact, the economy was growing more rapidly when Sunak, towards the end of his time in number 10, than it has done subsequently. So on that basis, it's a failure. Josh is quite right to highlight on the credit side of the column, foreign affairs. Clearly, he did well to manage the relationship with Donald Trump, which is pretty tricky, and he did maintain support for Ukraine again. So those are big ticks there. But in terms of his stewardship of the economy, it's been pretty mediocre. And you would have to say, clearly, they went in at the start with some big tax increases. The employers' national insurance contributions hike was a disaster. That's why unemployment has gone up. That's why a lot of people feel very precarious in their jobs now. It's really laid waste to sectors of the economy like hospitality and retail. The increases in the minimum wage are now starting to have a real bite on employment in those sectors. The fact that they cut the threshold at which employers' NICs kicks in. I mean, that is why so many people in retail and hospitality have lost their jobs, and that, frankly, is not a great legacy.
He, of course, one thing he will hand over on foreign affairs is the person that many regard as a real architect of any foreign policy successes, and that is Jonathan Powell, National Security Advisor, who apparently is going to stay on to help Mr. Burnham. But here's the electoral inheritance, and it's, I'm afraid, pretty striking. Look at where we've gone from July 2024 down to that red line, down to July 2026, down to below 20%. And that's what Andy Burnham is going to, 20.3%, Andy Burnham's going to have to try to deal with. What are our expectations? What do you think he's going to do first, Helen?
So I think the number 10 in the North thing is really real. I think he's going to talk a lot about devolution. That graph to me shows you people really wanted change in July 2024, and then they haven't got change, and so Labour have declined, and then they're going again for the party that's saying, I'm going to change. So in the way that you've seen Reform perform. So what I really hope Andy Burnham does is genuinely take some of his necessary radicalism and actually make some decisions about how Whitehall is structured. You see all of them, and you saw it in your politicians you've interviewed today. They're all very hesitant about who's going to get which jobs. The most confident thing we could see is actually a properly rewired state with much fewer ministers and smaller departments.
What, fewer jobs for politicians?
Well, yeah, why not? Let's give that a go. See how it works.
But what about fewer civil servants?
Well, also think that is a thing that I would be very supportive of, actually. I think that our administrative state, and especially the amount of people we have in SW1 in London, it's far too many. We need a smaller, more focused team all round.
Well, if you're going to devolve as much power as he says he wants to, then you're going to have to shred Whitehall. I mean, you'd have to cut job count by a third, otherwise you wouldn't save any money. You'd be paying people to do jobs here and in Manchester, so... it would end up being a war on Whitehall of a sort.
Well, it's actually implicit in the defence investment plan, isn't it, that there's going to be a cut in civil service headcount numbers. That's partly how they're going to pay for the extra defence spending. But, I mean, you know better than anyone that it's not very easy to cut civil service jobs.
Well, I think that the civil service likes working for governments that have clear ideas, and civil service, in my experience, likes doing things. So, absolutely, if there's a rebalance of the slightly fewer jobs in SW1, but more jobs in different parts of the country, more jobs in different sectors, the economy's growing again, no one's going to be against that. We've had times of really significant civil service reductions in the past, and actually what we've ended up with the other side of it is a more productive civil service. So I'm slightly against the kind of prejudice that all civil servants just like doing nothing and not getting things done and don't actually care most about our country.
Do you not think, though, the problem is with Labour politicians is like Gordon Brown. You know, Gordon Brown was a great believer in inputs. Look how much we're spending. He wasn't that focused on outputs, and my worry is that Burnham's going to be like that.
A week is a long time in politics. We might know more next Sunday. See you then.